Hi, we're here in Orlando at Vectors 2019. Joining me on the program now is Jeff Pulver. Jeff, good to see you.
Nice to be here.
So, like I said, we're here at the SkySwitch user conference, all about unified communications, and a big part of that, of course, is something that you've got a long, long history in, which is voice communications. We're still talking about voice. I thought it was going away.
I don't think voice ever goes away. I think voice will remain the killer application for us in the future. And as humanity evolves, we still have a need to speak to each other, to be heard. Right? One of the biggest challenges technology offers us is the challenge of you're speaking, but is anyone listening? Do you really hear what I'm saying? Are you so busy that you see someone's mouth move, but you're not receiving the message? And can you act on that? And unfortunately, some people do. Some people actually act based on what they think they heard versus what was received. And in an era of unified communications, before the unified communications was communications. And what are we really unifying anyway? Are we talking about bringing messages together with some emojis? Are we talking about, just communicating in a meaningful way? Because at the end of the day, for me, a successful conversation has heart and soul. And that the reason why I believe voice is the killer app and will remain the killer app is if you were to go perhaps in a personal context and someone is missing from your life, the moment when you call someone and you say, I'm okay, or I love you, or this or that, it's very powerful. And while a picture might be worth 1,000 words, just a moment conversation with somebody has so much more meta information being shared. And then we look at it from a business context. If you're having a dispute with somebody, you could, yell at them on Twitter. You could send them really crazy, horrible emails. But once in a while, if you pick up the phone and you understand it was all based on a misread of an email. See, in 1996, I was reading about Metcalfe's law and Moore's law, and on my mailing list I wrote Pulver's law. This is 96. This is like 23 years ago. I said that the more virtual we become, the more we need to have face-to-face meetings. And this happened specifically because I was working, and I sent my boss an email, and oh my God, did he get pissed at me. And I realized I was missing a comma. And if you've ever gotten these messages or got outraged when someone sent you a message, this wasn't text, this was an email, and I realized no emails I was sending, he wasn't listening. I had to go up to his office and talk to him, and I was about to apologize, but I explained what I was saying. Oh, we're good. And that from that moment, I understood that as much as we write and we share pictures, speaking one-to-one is so much more powerful. And if in the business world we're now looking at communication platforms that enable us to scale our ability to communicate, and that also means that we get to be heard, and then that is very, very important stuff. And so voice is the killer app, but it's ultimately, to me, it's people-to-people communications, and we can do one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, many-to-one. And how we look at communication platforms that enable us to communicate with each other and the world, that will not change. So what does change are the platforms people use to communicate, maybe their tolerance, because over the last bit of time our attention spans are getting smaller. But ultimately, voice is the killer app, and perhaps if you could replicate those holograms from the latest Avengers movie or maybe the last Star Wars movie, if we can get holograms like that to be that effective, strong competition. But other than that, I think that voice is and will be a killer app.
So we've got a very large portion of our workforce in the U.S. now, made up of millennials who are, addicted to text messaging and messaging apps and IM and those sorts of things, emojis, all these things that you talk about.
They have their own emoji communication. And look, in the last 10 years, did you go back to school and learn how to communicate to a millennial? I know I haven't. But it's, my God, if you send someone a text with the wrong punctuation, dare you put capitalize something or put a period, it's offensive. So while we were talking, another emoji came into existence, and another way to disconnect with someone by accident happened. I do believe that as millennials get a little bit older, or millennials go into the communication sector, there may be a new communication company empowered by millennials. Because my experience is that millennials are brilliant, and they think differently than me, and maybe than you. And that our ability to communicate effectively is shifted because they don't know what we're thinking. and we know they don't know what we know that. So I do believe that there will be some competition coming into the workforce from millennials that are now of age to come to work who will say, you know what, I want to communicate my way. And that while emojis are still evolving and coming in from other really ecosystems, because the emojis came really from Japan, and the texting came from the UK, and then from the rest of Europe, there will be millennial speak. It's already there, right? And I think that we will suffer through and deal with companies who communicate in their own islands and the rest of the world. And I think that those companies that can build bridges that allow these different communities to exist and really do great and really be successful, but could connect the bridges, because we're not looking for islands, but for every generation, there's a little island that forms. And if we can build the bridges to connect the generations together, we can thrive in a very, very big way. But I do have a thing about millennial communications and how challenging it is. And if you have any relatives who are millennials, or you work with millennials, you could just appreciate the day-to-day challenge of trying to be in a loving way, affectionate and caring and frustrated. And it's a mutual frustration. It's not one way. It's a bilateral frustration, and it's a real challenge. And I think that is the biggest disruption entering our communication industry, is the emergence of millennials. And how do we sell them? And how do we communicate with them? And how do we deliver services that they need if we don't understand how they think?
So what's interesting about them is the one thing that they do use is video. So if voice is the killer app and in-person is even more valuable.
I'm just waving just in case there's out there.
Is video even more valuable?
I think for some people, video becomes the common denominator. In 1964, the CEO of AT&T was on stage at the World's Fair, and he spoke about his vision that video was the future. But it took from 1964 to 2007 for Apple and Steve Jobs to release the first iPhone. And it took those many years to go from, yes, video is the future, to, and now my niece Emily, shout out to Emily, she uses FaceTime as if it was, she wouldn't know it was video communications or video. No, it's just a way to communicate. And if I get, she's like the only person who will FaceTime me, and for her it's natural. And so finally took from 1964 to 2019, it took all that time span to enable something where a visionary CEO shared the future. And so for millennials, I do believe video is their water, and that's how they need to drink it in order to survive and to communicate and to be effective. As much as I like to think voice is my water, with proper electrolytes, it's really video for millennials, and it's natural and it's organic and it's something which is just there. And so I never saw that coming. I never saw that there'd be a generation where they just assume it works. I mean, like, I recently spoke to a bunch of 14 and 15-year-olds about my history in communications, and they were a generation that was born way after the Pulver order came out. I mean, and so they're living in a world where it's natural to open up an app and click on someone's face and talk to them and not care about how much it costs, because it doesn't cost them anything. They don't have any references that it costs money to call long distances. And so we're now getting generationally ahead of where the technology brought us. And so it's empowering, at the same time just scary at some level. But at the end of the day, I do believe voice is the killer app. I do believe and respect why video could be the killer app. But what I'm talking about voice is that it's very hard in person to ignore someone talking to you. Because if you're ignoring, I know it, I can see it, right? And so that is why, so at least when you're watching, when someone has a video, you don't know how many moments they're watching of it. Mm-hmm. But if you're speaking to somebody, if they're not providing audible cues that they're listening, you're being ignored. And then we create walls. I understand both. But as far as like going forward into the near future, I think that unified communications for businesses will still focus on what they focused on in 2019. I don't see necessarily big shifts to deal directly with millennial needs. But when that generation comes of age and the engineers are in the space and the customers with the big spending power in that space, then we may see a shift and and maybe someone could articulate what their needs are so we can deliver services for them. And that's the biggest problem is the accidental miscommunication, that we don't know what they need, so we guess, as opposed to them saying, this is exactly what we want.
And at the end of the day, I think you mentioned it a couple of times, you hit upon it, is regardless of what the medium or the application is, you just get to a point where it has to work, and it just works, and it just becomes part of it, and then we use it.
And you rely on it.
Yeah.
And that's the best part, is that when you deliver a solution and people just use it, and they take you for granted. But then it's in some ways very empowering to you because you know it works. And what do we want? You want happy customers. You want people who just know it's going to be there and they use it all the time. And then it's like problem solved.
Any thoughts or projections or predictions for what we're going to see in the world of communications, in the next decade?
Decade's a long time into the future. I do think that we will see big worldwide movements to break up Facebook. AT&T in 1984 was forced to break up when AT&T maybe had 100 million customers as individuals and maybe 400 million phone lines for businesses. There's never been a communication company in the world that had 3 billion customers. We don't know how to regulate them. We don't understand what happens when AI runs on those networks and you have scandals like Cambridge Analytica. Because what we know is that to the extent that Facebook is a social experiment to the people who run Facebook, that's a problem. And I would not be surprised whatsoever to see worldwide, the world coming together as one to get rid of Facebook, or at least to regulate it, because there needs to be accountability. There needs to be, yes, Facebook brings love. It is true, people found love. People found loved ones, relatives and others through Facebook. But never before in history have we had hate propagate so damn fast without being checked than today. And I blame Facebook for that. And so if we want to stop hate, we may not change cultures around the world, but we can try to disconnect the hate from bringing on hate. And if it's, I believe that light wins over darkness, but the first step is to disconnect where possible. So 10 years into the future, if you're looking from 2020 to 2030, other social networks will come up. I mean, if you don't remember, Facebook once catered to college students. The mean age on Facebook is not college students anymore. They've gone away. It's why Facebook also owns Instagram and WhatsApp. That was a very good strategic purchase for Zuck. Very good. In terms of technology evolutions, I like to think as we go into 2030 that holograms are real, and then an extraterrestrial life will be proven to be very real too. I happen to be an amateur radio operator, and I've recently discovered a form of digital communication called FT8. Which allows, with very little propagation and lots of noise, to be able to pull signals out. It was created by two physicists that I believe in the next 10 years will win a Nobel Prize on communications, and I believe FT8 is the protocol that will be used for interstellar communications. But as a ham operator, we were able to play with AM radio long before it became commercial, FM radio before it's commercial, et cetera. So that's where I'm playing right now, is in interstellar communication. So when I look to the future, there will be customers, there will be creators of technologies, and there will be always a need to sell to them. How we sell to them is going to change. Are we going to do face-to-face? Are we going to try to scale it? And I'll take the bet that at the end of the day that the successful companies still know how to offer interpersonal communications. That I think humanity wins. I think that if we try to automate so much and we take the soul out of what we do, we lose. And that I hold out hope for humanity, because I will get really worried when AI and robotics that teaches a robot to be vulnerable. When a robot's on stage giving a keynote presentation and is being vulnerable, run to the hills.
Good. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for some of that insight and visionary outlooks for the future. We'll catch up again in a few years to see where we've gotten.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.